would you please check your ideas and opinions at the door? All your philosophical and religious views, all your logic, because I say check it at the door advisedly because you can pick it up again when you go out if you feel unsafe without it. I'm not trying to argue you out of your opinions and views. I'm merely suggesting that for the sake of an experiment, you temporarily suspend them.
Hello and welcome to the Philosophical Minds podcast, an exploration of all things philosophical, alchemical, and esoteric, from the psycho-spiritual to the material-chemical nature of the all. Join me and my guests as we inquire into the liminality of mind and matter, and tend to the fertile soils of awareness and perception while facilitating an expanded consciousness from the individual to the collective. If you enjoy the show and find it of value, consider supporting and becoming a patron via the Patreon at patreon.com/philosophicalminds. A small contribution makes a big difference and definitely makes it easier for me to continue the show, although I will always do my best to keep it flowing regardless. Thank you all, and let's get into it. All right, I'm here this evening with musician, author, Hellenistic astrologer, frater of both the Arizona College of Societas Rosicruciana and Civitatis Federatis, I always screw that word up, as well as the Hermetic.
Oh, that was great.
Awesome. As well as the Hermetic Society of the Golden Dawn, worshipful master of Ascension Lodge 89 here in Arizona, and host of the always excellent Tria Prima podcast. Jaime Paul Lamb. Jaime, it's good to have you back.
Sky, it's great being here. Always a pleasure to talk to you, and I was looking forward to this when you asked me last week or whatever.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, and
definitely a fan of the show.
Much appreciated.
Yeah.
I'll preface this one with I'm kind of like a little nervous on this one because my mind is so back and forth. I definitely have a lot more to consider after talking with Ike Baker about the same kind of subject matter, but then it opened up a bunch more questions for me, and I just don't want to come across as confrontational, but I do want to ask questions about my genuine confusion with some of these things, and I realize there's obviously a lot that I have to learn. Yeah. So regardless, should be fun.
Well, I'm also, I was going to say, I'm also getting more and more comfortable saying, I don't know. If I don't know the answer to something, it's, to have some epistemic humility, I think is important. And sometimes the answer is, I have no idea. So if I don't expect that answer, like that's better than me trying to kind of just jive talk my way through something,
I agree 100%.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
like I was telling Ike, one of my friends, Roger Lambert, he's an operative alchemist over there in France, and he's doing like tons of antimony work like all the time, and it's constantly pouring glass, like sometimes for days on end, nonstop. And he's told me that like pretty much without a doubt during the hour of Saturn, he notices like way better quality glass and much more vivid color coming through. And he said sometimes it won't even be intentional, but he'll, just look at the time and the hour, and it just happens to be a great result in the hour of Saturn, like repeatedly over and over. So anyway, yeah, just wanted to kind of throw that out there because it's like a example of a person that I've talked to that's done a lot of investigating and has had results. I don't know how or why it makes sense, but I just want to put that out there up front.
Well, it's funny you bring up Saturn. I was just talking to some friends in my GD group, actually. Saturn right now is in domicile in Aquarius. And you said it's a Saturnian hour right now? I didn't look, but...
Oh, I do not know. I'm not sure.
Yeah, so... Yeah. Saturn rules dogs, too, according to Lily, and my dog was just barking.
Oh, wow.
Hey, boo. Coincidence? I think not.
So yeah.
Yeah, but there's actually good there's actually good Saturnian astrological weather coming up right now, because like I was saying, Saturn still has a month that he's in Aquarius. And
Mm-hmm.
plus he's of course he's the day ruler of the air triplicity, so he's in his triplicity, plus he's in his term or bound. In Hellenistic they call it the bound, but in medieval and Renaissance it's called a term. It's
Wow.
a little arc segment of the ecliptic. So we've got a really dignified Saturn right now. So any of your listeners who are interested in doing any sort of Saturnian work, that could even be personal work, like boundaries, limitations, things like that, Saturnian intentions, but also alchemical operations, or doing things with like talismans or amulets, like consecrating them and charging them. This is a great time to get into Saturn work, especially like a particularly good day. I'm not sure if the podcast will be out by then, but a particularly good day is Saturday, February 11th.
Mm.
There's particularly at like 1 o'clock Arizona time, there's just this convergence of a bunch of high dignity Saturnian influence.
Wow.
So
Yeah,
something to think about if you've got any Saturn work you got to do.
I think it must have been something that I either read from you or listened to of yours where you were mentioning that. And if I'm remembering correctly, it's a pretty rare phenomena that won't occur again for a really long time. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was the one. So that one was on the 28th. So January 28th, there was another good, and you don't get really great Saturn elections all the time. An election is when you do something at a certain astrological time, you elect to do it. You don't get a bunch of great Saturn elections all the time because Saturn's so slow. He's like 29 years going around the ecliptic. So let's say if you miss Saturn in Aquarius when he heads into Pisces, you have to wait a long time, many, many years actually,
Oh,
before he's back in domicile. You could wait till he's in Libra and he's exalted, but even that's another, I think that's another like uh, probably 12 years, 12 to 15 years. So this
dang.
is a very special time for Saturn.
Okay. So
Uh-huh.
yeah, I want to definitely discuss a little bit of like the Hermetic astronomical astrological system and theory in regards to things like the Chaldean order in particular, and the planetary hours and the days of the week and month, and how they're all related, and
Sure.
to like, magical, alchemical, and astrological systems and such. And then after that, I wanted to get your insights on
Yeah.
a few Robert Flood diagrams in regards to the music of the sphere stuff. But yeah, I just want
Cool.
to go ahead and start with the days of the week and the order that they occur. We've got Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. That's going to be Sun, Moon,
That
Mars,
sounds right.
Mars, Mercury,
Yeah.
Jupiter, Venus, and Saturn. I'll just
Uh-huh.
ask you right off the bat, kind of how do you feel about this order as it is, and why the days of the week are in this order, these 7 days, and what's it based off of?
So they're in that order because of the planetary hours. It's kind of difficult to explain, but let me see if I could sort of noodle this out. But the planetary hours affect the order of the planet. They're the impetus as to why we get the planets in the order that they're in. So first, you have to start by thinking about what they call their Chaldean order. The Chaldean order of planets, I guess it's maybe reverse Chaldean would go the moon, Mercury, Venus, the sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, right? So the way that the Chaldean or the Babylonian astronomers, astrologers, the way that they got this order was due to the diurnal the transit of their orbits, I guess annual transits of their orbits. So, for instance, we know that the moon goes all the way around the ecliptic every 28 days, thereabouts, right? So the next fastest planet on the ecliptic is Mercury. its fastest annual transit rate, basically how quickly it orbits. Mercury would be the next fastest planet, then Venus, because that's the next furthest one, or the next the next one out from Mercury, if that makes sense. So basically, you see that Saturn is the seventh heaven. It's the furthest visible planet because it's the slowest. It takes about 29 years to go all the way around the ecliptic. Jupiter takes like 12 years, less than half of Saturn. And like, for instance, you were probably doing some stargazing around the winter solstice in 2020, when the Jupiter and Saturn great conjunction happened. A lot of people were watching that because it was so visible at night. And it was a really cool great conjunction, because great conjunctions are a cycle that sort of takes about 20 years. So every 20 years you get a great conjunction. And if you were watching those, you saw that Saturn, so that happened on the first degree of Aquarius. Saturn's still in Aquarius, but Jupiter has moved into Aries already. So he's moved like, more than 2 signs, more than 60 degrees already. Anyway, back to the planetary hours and why we get the days of the week in that particular order. It works out first from that Chaldean order of planets, from the moon, the fastest, to Saturn, the slowest. So you'll find that, let's say this, on a Monday morning at sunrise, the moon is the ruler of that hour, and every planetary hour is ruled by a planet. So there are 12 daytime hours and 12 nighttime hours, and they expand and contract based on the hours of daylight. So the only time that they're actually 60-minute hours is like right on the equinoxes. So if you catch them right on the equinoxes, you're going to have 12 daytime 60-minute hours and 12 nighttime 60-minute hours. But any other time of the year, like for instance at the winter solstice, when it's most skewed, just as at the summer solstice, it's the most skewed. In the winter, you get short days and you get longer nights. So you're going to have longer planetary hours at night during the winter and shorter daytime hours. So the hours are almost never 60 minutes. The real hours they expand and contract based on the time of year. So it's this breathing, living system. So the reason why the planets are in the order that they're in, or the days of the week rather in that order, is, let's say it's Monday morning at sunrise. So the moon rules that hour. And if you keep counting, the moon, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, I'm not going to do the whole thing, but if you go 24 hours ahead of that, you end up with Mars ruling the first hour of daylight on a Tuesday. So let me say that once more, because this is important. I hope it makes sense. If on a Monday morning at sunrise, you will observe the moon ruling that first hour. If you count 24 hours ahead of that, Mars will be ruling that, let's say, 6 a.m. hour. That first hour of daylight would be ruled by Mars. And if you count 24 hours ahead of that in Chaldean order, the Chaldean order of the 7 planets, you'll find that Mercury is ruling that first hour. So the days of the week are in that order because of the planetary hours. The first hour of daylight is always the name of that, the planetary ruler of that day. So
Wow. Okay.
there's a heptagram image. See if you could tell me.
Yeah.
See if that made sense.
That is definitely a couple really good points that I hadn't considered. One was that the hours themselves, they're not always 60 minutes for one. So I think that that's a point of confusion, because if we think of an hour, we think of 60, but like you pointed out, that's not necessarily the case. And then that's really interesting how you tied it together with how the hours are, what they're ending with is determining the next day, because I was going to say, if we look at the Chaldean order, like in its order, it would be like Moon, Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. So that would make the days of the week in order: Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, and then Saturday, which that's where I was like, how did it get that? That's where the confusion really was for me, because I mean, because if you think of like, okay, so if we're talking about how your Sunday or Monday, we would start with Monday, and then the hours would end up going into Mars for the next day. And then so that's what determines and creates and makes that day Tuesday, because it's associated with Mars. So I think where the confusion was is, if we're looking at the Chaldean order, it would be Monday, then Wednesday, in terms of, because it'd be the moon and then Mercury, if we're talking about the planetary orbital speeds in that order. Yet the hours,
Right.
the way that the hours tie together is a different order. So it's like, that's the part where it's a little, I guess, confusing.
Well, the days of the week are not in Chaldean order, because they're based on the planet that rules the dawn hour, the hour of dawn, from when the sun just penetrates the ascendant. That planet that rules that hour gives the name of the day of the week, and it changes in our week, in the order of the days of the week, because of the ruler of the first hour of dawn. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's how the days of the week got their name. And that's not like some neat mathematical astronomical parlor trick. That is literally why the days of the week are in the order that they're in, because the first hour of every day is ruled by, a particular planet. And the way that the math works out is that it goes the moon. If you're starting on a Monday, it goes the moon, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, Saturn, and then the sun, so the days of the week.
And
so, yeah, and it definitely comes from the planetary hours.
okay. And does that have any corresponding reflection in a literal sense, in terms of our perspective from either geocentrically or yeah, like or georeferential, I think is the right terminology? Does that have an actual literal reflection in terms of, say, we are entering into Tuesday and the hour is at dawn, it is going to be related to Mars? Is there any reflection from our perspective on Earth in terms of what's the determining factor of what is giving that planet rulership at that time again? And maybe you already said this and I was just confused, but does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So it's a little difficult to make it clear. It's a notoriously difficult thing to talk about, but yes. So when you have the Chaldean order of planets, they rule the planets in their order of the days of the week are ruled by their corresponding planet in that first hour of dawn. Now, in terms of, is there anything literal happening in terms of that celestial body? Is that what you mean? Like, is there any place in such a way as to be
what
physical ruler?
Yeah, is there like a physical energetic relationship that's occurring within all of these hours between Earth and those planetary bodies that's giving it its significant effect?
Well, that's just a matter of like cosmic sympathies and correspondences, which are important to, let's say, theurgy or magic, you know. So there are, just as we say, it's the same thing like Saturdays, for example, Saturn, it's ruled by Cassiel, the angel Cassiel, who is the, and Agiel would be the corresponding planetary intelligence. So we've made these tables over centuries of correspondences, and over time, you know, like look in all the Solomonic literature, the Lemegeton, you know, which has the Ars Goetia in it. Um, you know, you back to the Hygromantia, the Testament of Solomon. I mean, a lot of these Solomonic grimoires, particularly, have an emphasis on astrological sympathies, you know. So we do things at certain times because the influence of that planet, though it might not be necessarily causal and physical, the influence of that planet is operative or active at these certain times. So yeah,
Okay.
so it adds like cosmic momentum to your endeavor. Like you were talking about your alchemist friend, when he was doing things at a Saturnian hour, he got better results for whatever that operation was, you know. So that's the principle I'm talking about. And that was the principle like Paracelsus talked about, you know, when he would go gather plants and herbs for his apothecary and for his, you know, spagyric operations and things, he would do them under certain astrological conditions. Like, you know, there are certain times to harvest them, there are certain times to do the various alchemical processes that are just more hermetically resonant. You know, there's a hermetic resonance between the microcosm and the macrocosm. So the more that we can engage cosmic momentum, the more sort of influence and success we have in that particular operation, at least according to Hermetic doctrine. You know,
Yeah. Okay. And then so
but
yeah, I guess
yeah, I think it's, no, I was going to say, I think it's important to do that. I mean, a lot of our, just like we were saying in the grimoire tradition, you know, they invariably prescribe using, you know, planetary days, planetary hours, plus looking into like now, like we were just talking about Saturn. Saturn is in domicile now. So anything you have to do, amulets, talismans, alchemical operations. This is a good time. This is a good election. This is a good astrological time to engage Saturnian influence because he's highly dignified, as we say. So the dignity of a planet is when it is in its own sign or in the sign of its exaltation, or when it's the lord of the triplicity like Saturn is right now. He's the daytime ruler of the air signs, and he's in Aquarius, an air sign. So he's got good dignity there. When they're in their own decan or 10-degree arc segment of the ecliptic, one that they rule, you know, or when they're in their own term or bound, which is another smaller arc degree. So there's just better times to utilize certain planetary influences when they are more concentrated. That's important. You know, they're more condensed, kind of. It's a stronger current
yeah.
of planetary influence at certain times.
Okay. And then maybe you could
Time
talk.
is,
Sorry, go ahead.
go on.
I was
No, I
gonna
was going to say time is a crucial factor.
yeah. I was gonna say maybe you could you used the word domicile a couple times. Maybe you could describe a little bit more like the signification and exaltation and kind of what that means in terms of astronomical relations and why what makes something domicile.
Okay, so when a planet is in domicile, when it is in a zodiacal sign that it rules, and those come from those come from a chart called the Thema Mundi. So there's this ancient teaching method, and there's a diagram called the Thema Mundi. Now, this has been around for over 2,000 years, this Thema Mundi. And what it does is it shows what is the legendary birth of the cosmos. So supposedly, and according to ancient Hellenistic astrological doctrine, when the cosmos was formed, the moon was in Cancer, the sun was in Leo, Mercury was in Gemini. Mercury was in Gemini. Venus was in Taurus. The sun, well, I already said the sun was in Leo. Mars was in Aries. Jupiter was in Sagittarius. I mean, they rule 2 signs each, and then Saturn was in either or in both kind of Aquarius and Capricorn. So the way it works is, imagine a chart right here, or maybe you could pull it up later, or when you're doing editing on this show, look up the Thema Mundi, because it shows this legendary birth of the cosmos. Thema Mundi means chart of the world.
Oh, okay.
So it's like the birth chart or the inceptional chart of the cosmos. And that's why the planets are in domicile. Domicile means they're in the zodiacal sign that they rule. So exaltation is a slightly different thing. It does involve planets in signs, in a particular degree of a sign, actually. So like Saturn is exalted in 15 degrees Libra, but he's exalted in Libra just generally, but there's actually a degree as well. So I say that because they may have, now this is sort of a conjecture. They may have based the exaltation scheme, where the planets are in their signs of exaltation. They may have based that on an event that happened, I think, in 768 BCE, when the planets were in the signs of their exaltation, and a certain thing went on in Babylon. I think the exaltations were meant to be an inceptional chart of a certain event that actually happened. And for some reason, I'm thinking 768 BCE. I read about that in Rupert Gledow's Origin of the Zodiac. So the exaltation scheme is very old. In fact, older than the domiciles, older than the Thema Mundi.
Wow.
So those are 2 points of dignity. So there are 5 points of dignity.
Oh, wow.
Domicile is the strongest. Exaltation is the next, and then triplicity comes after that. So triplicity is based on the elements. So you have 3 air signs, you have 3 earth signs, you have 3 water signs, and 3 fire signs. So certain planets rule certain, what we call trigons, because they make an equilateral triangle. So, like, for instance, the sun rules the fire trigon by day. Saturn rules the air trigon by day, you know.
For some reason, I would have
Venus
thought
rules
Saturn was Earth, but I don't know why I would have thought that.
No, that's typically what you would say, like alchemically, and even in terms of cold and dry. Like Saturn's qualitative properties are he's
Qualitative.
cold and dry. Yeah, and that's something we associate with the earth, coldness and dryness. But yeah, he happens to rule the air triplicity, though. And air qualitatively is actually hot and moist. So you would think Jupiter would be the ruler of the air, but not the case. I'm not sure why or where the scheme of the triplicity rulers comes from, but it's, well, Dorotheus was an astrologer from whom we get the most popular triplicity rulerships. Anyway, so we've got domicile, we've got exaltation, we've got triplicity, which we just talked about. Now there's two more. The next one down the line is the decans. So the decans are 10-degree arc segments. There are 36 of them on the ecliptic, and each decan is ruled by a certain planet, and they do go in their Chaldean order. If you do I think it's the Ptolemaic decans. There's a modern decan scheme that's a little different, but most people go with the ancient decan scheme. Now, lastly, and the decans are Egyptian. That's a contribution from Egyptian astronomy, the decans. So on coffin lids during the late dynastic period and through the Hellenistic period, they used to put decanal imagery on the lids of coffins. So as a guide into the duat or the afterlife. And then lastly in the things, so we did domicile, exaltation, triplicity, decans. Now the last one is called the bounds or the terms. And these are also an Egyptian contribution. And they're unequal arc segments of the ecliptic. So there are 5 terms per sign, and they're ruled by a different planet. But the sun and the moon, being luminaries, do not rule any of the terms or bounds. So
wow.
Why that is the case, I have no idea, but this is just established astrological doctrine. It's a lot to remember, Sky.
Wow,
it's a lot of stuff and a lot of just thousands of years of doctrine.
Yeah, that's amazing. And then so kind of bouncing back to like the planetary rulership and whatnot with the sympathies and the sympathy detection. In detecting those planetary sympathies and the rulerships, it was probably just based on maybe like historical trial and error and experimentation. Would that be your assessment of how made these connections with what those sympathies and how they're occurring and having their effects?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it comes from Omenic observation in Mesopotamia. So you've got from Sumer to Akkad to Assyria to Babylon, and these 4 major civilizations that make up the Mesopotamian complex of civilizations, right? And these were the first people to really codify our ideas that we have even today in Western tropical astrology. So basically, here's how I think, if you're asking why do the planets mean certain things that they mean and how they develop those significations, is that kind of what you mean?
Yeah, and the sympathy aspects of corresponding to how we get the hours and what is the sympathy and how that's being detected.
I see how it's being detected. All right, well, so over the course of many centuries and even millennia, man has been observing these planets and simultaneously observing events and phenomena on the terrestrial sphere. So the reason why I say it's omenic is because over time they notice that when XYZ happens in the sky, ABC happens on the earth, and they noticed correlations over time. So like if Mars was in some bad zodiacal condition, or if he was in a certain aspect relationship with another planet, or there was an eclipse, or any number of strange events against the stellar sphere, the sphere of the fixed stars in the zodiac, like when they noticed Saturn was in a certain constellation at a certain time. Well, they started to notice events on the earth that reflected those certain relationships, which is the sort of bedrock of astrological doctrine, is that the position and condition of the planets in the celestial sphere have a corresponding sympathetic effect on the terrestrial sphere. So couple that idea with the idea that we've been in a dialogue with the planets ever since prehistory. You know, mankind has been in this sort of relationship with the stars and planets, you know, with stellar lore that goes back many thousands of years, you know, like certain stories about how Orion was chasing the Pleiades, for example. You know, there are hundreds of tales of stellar lore, you know, that mankind has sort of composed and received, actually composed and received. Again, a micro macro kind of give and take. So imagine that over thousands of years, and imagine the ommenic observation of seeing planets in certain positions and conditions in the sky, and events on the earth, and correlation, and you know, mythology, astro mythology. So imagine all that happening over thousands of years, and it's no mystery that we would have a sort of sense of meaning and a sense of what the significations of each of these planets are. Like, what gods are they associated with? Obviously, if we think of something like Mercury, we would say, you know, Thoth, we would say Hermes, we would say, I think it was Nabu was the one of the Mesopotamian mercurial figures, mercurial sort of archetypes. But Idris, Enoch, you know, there's all these mercurial manifestations in earthly lore, you know, in our religions and in our myths. You know, so that's how we develop this sense of meaning and significance, corresponding to each of these planets, just over thousands of years of you know, astro epic storytelling. You know,
that is a great answer, and that totally makes sense. And so when you say gods, for some people they might be wondering, are you talking in archetypal and energetic? Are you talking about beings? How do you personally conceive of that notion when you're talking about these things in relation to the gods?
so a few years ago, I would have told you they're like psychomythological, archetypal sort of reflections of aspects of mankind's collective psyche or whatever. I would have, you know, given you some line like
Carl
that.
Jungian type explanation.
That sort of stuff. And I think that's a valid perspective still, but my perspective personally, since you asked personally how I feel about it, as my perspective has changed. So now I feel like they are objective entities. It doesn't matter if I'm an earthling or even alive. These beings, these entities have their own meaning and purpose, their own agendas to fulfill, their own ups and downs and lives. They're alive, living, objective entities that, you know, that I can get in a relationship with through astrotheurgy, let's say, or through aligning my life with, you know, the patterns of the stars and planets, you know, particularly vis-a-vis like my natal chart. You know, everybody has a natal chart, and that's sort of your cosmic key. That's an individual's cosmic key to meaning and purpose and fate and destiny and Hymarmene and Tyche, and you know, it's a fantastic, nuanced, super complex affair. I mean, and it's palpable.
Yeah.
You know, like there are things like that happen that I've seen in my chart, and I do a lot of astrology for other people. So I've seen some things that are just like uncanny, you know, found certain placements and certain manifestations of planetary configurations that directly mirror the life of the native, and the native is the subject of a natal chart. So
Damn.
yeah, so that's why I've come to take a different kind of I've come to a different sort of place with that. I have a different perspective than I did even a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
that is their objective real entities.
Yeah. And so with one of the particular dignifications, earlier you mentioned like the Ptolemaic or Egyptian deacon scheme. And is that particular dignification, is that based off of the geocentric model or what? Like the Ptolemaic?
It is because they're in their Chaldean or Ptolemaic order. The decans are in that that order, so you only experience that order from the perspective of the earth. So absolutely the Deccan scheme is georeferential. I tend to say georeferential instead of geocentric, just because I think it's a little tighter fit. You know, our reference point as human beings is the earth. We're earthlings. So it would only make sense that we experience the cosmos from the earth, which is our locus of human consciousness. So when we engage in our sort of interactions with the stars and planets, we're doing that from this perspective. So, um, so yeah, and that's why we get things like the Chaldean order. If you were standing on, say, Venus, the Chaldean order would not um, work out, you know.
Yeah,
You'd have the
definitely.
earth in there too.
And so is georeferential, is that, if you were to compare to geocentric, do they look the same in terms of the model?
Sort of, but it depends on which system you're talking about. So for example, the system that I like best, let me say this. I understand that the sun is at the center of our solar system. That's fine. I totally get that. I mean, that's real and observable. But the sun and the earth are both moving, right? They're
Right.
both whirling through space at some insane speed that I don't even know. Probably the speed of light, right? I mean,
Yeah.
they're just so, and they're in mostly vastly empty space. So does it really matter which one is revolving around the other? That's,
Not at all. No.
so the way I tend to think of it is here's a good way to look at that. Um, if you were looking at our solar system from above, from the north, imagine yourself looking down at our solar system. You have the sun in the center. You have all the planets revolving around the sun in their elliptical orbits, as Kepler taught us, right? Now, and imagine that the sun is stationary and these planets are moving around the sun. So if you could see that, take the pin out of the sun and stick it in the earth, but have all the movements be exactly the same. So you don't have to change anything from the heliocentric model to the georeferential model. All you have to do is stick the pin in the earth and do all the same movements. And that's what I mean by georeferential. Because let's say this, when you're at a park or something, or a wildlife preserve, and you go up to the map near the parking lot and it says you are here and there's a pin there, right? That pin is usually right where you're standing, right? So if that pin were like on the other, some farther side of the map, you couldn't properly say you are here, right? It would be absurd. That's like if it says you are here and you're not there, then the map is worthless, right? So imagine that with the with georeferentiality, right? So all we're doing is putting the pin where we are. We are on Earth. So just imagine the Earth is static, the Earth is stationary, and then imagine the sun and all the planets revolving around the earth in the same exact way that they would revolve around the sun. You see what I mean? But so that is to say this: Venus and Mercury are revolving around the sun, but the sun is revolving around the earth because the earth is stationary. So you got the sun there with Venus and Mercury revolving around it, but the sun is revolving around the earth. This is what's known as the Tychonic cosmology, named after Tycho Brahe, who was the predecessor to Kepler in the Habsburg's court, I think, in Bohemia somewhere. So anyway, he was a very notable cosmologist and astrologer and astronomer. So he came up with this Tychonic cosmos, which is essentially georeferentiality, because the earth is stationary and the planets move around the earth, the sun and planets and moon move around the earth in the same motions that we know in modern cosmology. So no different.
For
I
sure.
hope that makes sense, because
No,
that's an important.
It totally makes sense, and I've moved completely past caring about the geocentric versus the heliocentric point, because in regards to our place relative to the luminaries is what we're going off of and what matters. And I am not too familiar with how Tycho Brahe depicted his model, but the reason I asked was because when you look at these old depictions of the heliocentric model, you find that when you're looking at it, that Venus is the closest planet to the sun. But is that an actual georeferential perspective? If we are looking at it georeferentially, is Venus actually the closest to the sun? Because wouldn't it still be Mercury that's closest to the sun? So we're looking at, like, say, Robert Flood's diagram, for example, it's the same thing where it shows the sun and then it shows Venus, then Mercury, not Mercury, then Venus.
It shows that in Flood?
Yep. Yeah.
I'd like to see that diagram.
Yeah, let me
I'd
pull
like to see that one.
Let me pull it up real quick.
Yeah.
And so
there would be no reason for him to put Venus.
Yeah, this is one of the main points.
The last time
let me know if you could see my screen.
Let's see.
So we got the sun, and then Venus, then Mercury, then the moon. And I can pull up a bunch.
No, you're going backwards. You're going backwards. No, you're going backwards. So the Earth. Here, I could explain this model. This is the Ptolemaic model.
Mm-hmm.
So you see the center, like the very center of this circle?
Yes.
That's the Earth.
Okay.
And then you have water on top of that. You have air on top of water. You have fire on top of it. And then the sphere of the moon goes around the Earth. You see where it says Luna?
Yep.
So you get the sphere of air, the sphere of fire, because animal, mineral, vegetable is in the earth and water kind of lower realms.
Okay.
So you get the sphere of air, elemental air. Then you have elemental fire, which is ignis, right? And then you have the moon, Luna, and then you have Mercury, and then you have Venus. And then you have this. Oh, I see what you're you're saying. They're saying that in terms of speed.
Okay.
That's speed. That's not placement. It's speed.
So if that is in regards to speed, does that line up?
This is where they are. This is where they are in terms of the Earth. So if you're talking about Ptolemaic geocentricity, right? The Earth is at the center. The moon is a sphere around the Earth. Then Mercury's outside of that. Then Venus. Then the Sun. Then Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Like it says here, Martis, Jovis, and Saturni. And then outside of that, you have the sphere of the fixed stars and zodiac. I see what's confusing you though. What's
Yeah,
confusing you is that Venus is closer to the sun than Mercury in that model,
but I think you're right.
right?
Okay, so now I'm looking at the Chaldean order and in regards to the orbital periods. And so it starts with Moon, and then it goes Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars. Yeah, so then that is, you are right about that. That's correct. But yeah, that's what was
I
one of
could
the,
see what. Wait, go on.
I was
You were
just saying,
saying
yeah,
what?
that
That
was
was one of the things.
one of the major points of confusion, because there's a few other different diagrams that depict that same sort of thing, and it was causing confusion.
Yeah, this is the Ptolemaic cosmos, the Ptolemaic model, and it's geocentric, not georeferential. So if it were strictly georeferential, then yes, the spheres would go like this. It would go the Earth at the center, the moon, the sphere of the moon around the Earth,
Hmm.
and then the sphere of the sun. But that sphere of the sun would have, the sun has Venus and Mercury, rather Mercury and then Venus around
Yeah.
it. So imagine the sun going around the Earth, and because Mercury and Venus have what they call inferior orbits to the Earth, they are inferior planets because their orbit is inscribed inside of that of the Earth. The Earth's orbit inscribes a circle around the sun, and Venus and Mercury's kind of sphere is inside of that. So since they have an inferior orbit to that of the Earth, they can
Hmm.
be said to be moving around the sun. So imagine these two, if people are looking, these two
Hmm.
planets are Mercury and Venus, and this is the sun.
Hmm.
Well, they're going around the sun, but the sun is going around the Earth. So that's why when you look up at the night sky, or you look, and this is observational, you see the sun and you never see Mercury more than 28 degrees on either side away from it. Mercury is always within 28, it's tethered to the sun. That's why it's so hard to see Mercury, because the sun obviously burns off the light of Mercury. You can't see Mercury.
Wow.
So it's very rare. You have to wait until Mercury. I've seen them 2 or 3 times. I've seen Mercury 2 or 3 times, and I've actively like looked.
Wow.
So the way that you're going to see Mercury is like this: at in early morning, or at sunrise or sunset, before the sun has risen, or before the sun or just after the sun has set. If Mercury is at a pretty far elongation from the sun, that is to say, maybe even at his furthest 28 degrees. If Mercury is 28 degrees away from the sun, you might catch a glimpse of Mercury, let's say after the sun barely just sets. When the sun just barely sets, you may get a little shimmer of Mercury. I've seen him setting and I've seen him rising.
Wow.
When he sets, he's an evening star. When he sets after the sun sets, so the sun goes down, and then you might see Mercury a little bit after the sun is beneath the horizon. And same thing in the morning when he's a morning star. That's why they say Lucifer and
Venus, right?
Vesperos, I think it is. Well, no, it's not always Venus. So you can
Oh.
have a Lucifer Mercury. Lucifer
Whoa.
just means more star of the morning.
Okay.
Yeah. So like they also say Matutina and Vespertina, I think
That
it is.
must be why there's a
Matutina is of the
different,
morning. Like you
that
ever hear.
must, that makes sense. That's why there's probably that separate name for the morning star, because otherwise they would just call it Mercury or Venus. But no, they call it Lucifer because that's a separate designation, because they're different morning stars. That actually lends a lot of
Right.
insight into that.
Any planet could be a morning star, actually.
Oh,
You can
okay.
have Saturn as a morning. If you see Saturn in the eastern horizon just before sunset, Saturn is technically a morning star at that time.
Okay.
He's Luciferian, you might say at that
Yeah.
time. So
Okay. So then, all right,
And
now
if he sets,
okay.
well, I was just going to say, if just after the sun sets, you might catch a glimpse of some planets on the western horizon, and they are evening stars.
Now
You know,
do
so it
evening
just
stars have a particular name?
yes. So they're Vespertina, um, Hesperos, I think is one. There's Phosphoros and Hesperos. Hesperos. So in Latin, it's Matutina for star of the morning, Stella Matutina, and it's Vespertina, Stella Vespertina if they're an evening star. If it's, I forget what the opposite of Luciferos is. Luciferos, like Luke's. Luciferos means the light bringer. It's the light bringer because it's rising before the sun and it's pulling the light up, you know, bringer of light.
And you're blowing my
So it's
mind.
almost Promethean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Prometheus Rising.
So
Um,
yeah, Prometheus, obviously he took fire from the gods and brought it to man, right? So there's that Promethean morning star kind of thing that is Luciferian.
all right. So now I wanna kind of get in a little bit to the lunar cycles because I had some confusion or interesting questions about how the lunar cycles tie into like the months because we know that it's based off of like the 28-ish day period. I think technically it's like 28.5 or something like that. But if you do that calculation, it ends up being more like 13 months in a year versus 12. And then you can look at potentials of constellations like Ophiuchus, or I don't know, maybe that might tie in somehow. But so there's that aspect, and then there's like the names of the months themselves. We got like October, Oct, like octagon, November, Novum, like 9, or December, Deca, like 10. But when you actually look at that, if it was to represent it properly, it would be 8, 9, and 10, but October's the 10th month, November's the 11th, and so on. So they're not exactly aligned. So there's something that kind of got shish kebabbed along the way, it seems, with that. But those were just a couple of questions.
Yeah,
The 13-month thing, and then the names of the months.
let's do the second question first. So
Okay.
in terms of the months and why they don't line up to their numerical sort of prefixes, is because the ancient beginning of the year was the vernal equinox, and the vernal equinox is right around March 20th or so. If you count that as the beginning of the year, as it was for, probably millennia, that was the ancient beginning of the year is the vernal equinox, just as sunrise is the beginning of the day, or used to be. Now it's like midnight. And it's a similar system. You see how now calendrically we say, the next day happens at midnight. So
Mm-hmm.
just as collectively we say the year begins in winter, when actually anciently the beginning of the day was when the sun broke the eastern horizon, the dawn of the day, right? And annually, same thing. The beginning of the year was when the sun was at the vernal equinox, the vernal equinoctial point. So, which is like around March 20th. So, if you count March 20, watch this. Let me see if I can get this on your screen. March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, 8, November, 9, December, 10. So you see
Okay.
March,
All right.
April, May, June, July, August, September is 7, October is 8, November's 9, December's 10. That's if you start at the vernal equinox. It actually works out, but there has been, some they played with the calendar like the Julian and the Gregorian calendars. But it used to be, in fact, in Persia or Iran, I think they still use, I forget the name of it, but they still use the vernal equinox as the beginning of the year.
Damn. Alrighty then.
Yeah.
Well,
So we're out of we're out of sync with nature in a lot of ways, you know. We're out of sync with the cosmos. It's not great, but maybe one day there will be a major hermetic reform, which
hmm.
which we should have had in the
let's
Renaissance. We
let's make
almost
that
did.
happen.
Things were very close to that before the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment screwed everything up. I am so anti-Enlightenment.
Yeah, you've
The
kind of
Enlightenment is,
opened my mind in that regard about that whole enlightenment thing because that I was thinking on that more after our last conversation, and I think you're right.
well, yeah, I mean, that's where we get this sort of this, you know, positivism, the saddest part is the disenchantment of the cosmos, you know, that they had the Enlightenment project had exorcised, as one would a demon, they exorcised the anima mundi from the cosmos and left it just something that, you know, a dead mechanical clockwork to be counted and measured, as opposed to a living, breathing, sort of objective, uh, vital, and animated system, you know. So that's what we have the Enlightenment to thank for. I mean, there were some good things out of the Enlightenment, of course, in terms of medicine and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But oh, here's an interesting point about the Enlightenment. So I know you're interested in alchemy. I'm interested in astrology. So our two arts that we love were once holistic. So these things, alchemy, magic, and astrology, that we tend to call esoteric arts today. Well, before the Enlightenment, you wouldn't call them esoteric. You would call them just natural philosophy,
Such a good point.
natural science. So it's only after the Enlightenment that these arts were swept. These arts were separated from their sciences. The arts and sciences were kind of one holistic system, and then like, because look, both astrology and astronomy measure and chronicle the movements of celestial bodies against the ecliptic, let's say. But astrology came with the accompanying Hermetic belief that there was a sympathy, a micro macro sympathy between those movements in the celestial and those on the terrestrial sphere. And same thing with alchemy. So before the Enlightenment, alchemy and chemistry were one thing. You could say that what separated alchemy was the Hermetic belief that those operations that were occurring in the retort or the alembic or the athanor or the crucible, whatever, had a corresponding Hermetic operation in the alchemist, you know, like there was a sympathetic, resonant relationship there. So, and same thing with magic and technology. You know, magic was just a component of a broader technological system. It was technique. You know,
Yeah,
so
they should have called the
yeah, it's
enlightenment the endarkening.
sure, yeah, and you know, it's yeah. What was I going to say about that?
Magic and
The
technology.
oh yeah. So what happened was they separated the quantifiable from the qualifiable. You know, the quantitative from the qualitative. Just like they're starting to do, they're starting to sort of reverse this, maybe in quantum mechanics and stuff, because some people are starting to talk about qualia. You know how we talk about quanta?
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's another component that's starting to gain some currency, from what I understand, in the physics area, right? That people are starting to talk about qualia, which is the qualitative aspect of quanta. So if those two things can come together again in some sort of Pythagorean marriage, like Pythagoras is a great example, actually, because he had numbers for Pythagoras weren't merely counting integers. you know. It wasn't merely, Susan has 5 apples, take one away, there's 4 apples. It wasn't just like counting integers, but there was a qualitative, not merely quantitative, but a qualitative element to number in Pythagorean numerology, let's say, where the number 3 was like, it was Trinitarian. It was, it was the triad, and everything the triad stands for, a whole like suite of symbolical kind of concepts wrapped up in this number that we just think of as 3, right? But
Yeah.
it stood for something. It symbolized something meta numerical.
Wow. 100%. All right. So I want to get your thoughts
It's a
on
trip, huh?
it definitely is a trip. For sure. I even like the quaternity, or like the idea of the wholeness of the number 4. And I agree 100%. So I want to get your thoughts on
Yeah.
the 13 months versus the 12 months, and corresponding with the amount of moon cycles in a year.
So I'm not too great at this, but I do know there's a thing. I think it's based on something called the Metonic cycle. It's a 19-year cycle. If I remember correctly, the Saros period, Saros, there's a Saros period that is 18 years and 11 days. And then there's the Metonic cycle, named after Meton, this I forget what era he was, maybe like 300 BCE, maybe. Meton was this Greek or Hellenistic astronomer who observed this Metonic cycle of 19 years. So anyway, some years you will get 13 months in the year. So the problem of solely lunar calendars is that they've never been able to square those two. In fact, they're not even squared now, obviously, right? They've never, because I think the closest you can come is by looking at a longer term cycle, which I think, if I'm not mistaken, the Metonic cycle is like the beginning of one of those cycles, and it's a 19-year period. I might be wrong about that, but it's just a longer cycle,
Yeah.
because eventually they're going to line up, you know. But in terms of lunations and annual circuits of the sun, nobody's been able to square that in one calendar. That's never been done in one calendar,
Wow.
because they just simply only they sync up on a much longer term. Like, for instance, if they were to say the day is 19 years long, which why not? All right, the day is 19 years long. Then you could say, okay, we have a squared up uh, solely lunar calendar. So even at that, it would just be nominal. It would be arbitrary, right? But
Was the old
yes,
was the Hebrew calendar, was that based on Chaldean, or was that a 13 or 12 um month system? I forget.
they had 12 months because I think they had something to do with the tribes, or at
Okay.
least the tribes were associated each with a month, if I'm not mistaken. But I think they were based on like feasts and times of sacrifice and times of certain feasts and things like that. So there were cultural markers, if I'm not mistaken, in the Hebrew calendar. But yeah, I think those were the things that. Oh, an interesting thing about the months and the Hebrew. Did I say Greek? I meant Hebrew. In the Hebrew, the tribes and the months and the zodiacal signs. Well, there's this thing that the priest in the Temple of Solomon would wear this breastplate called the Choshen Mishpet, and the Choshen Mishpet had 12 stones on it. it was a golden breastplate with 12 gemstones on it. And each of those corresponded to a tribe. They corresponded to the 72 lettered name, or the Shem HaMephorash. They corresponded to the months and the zodiacal signs as well. And they say that, I read a paper on this a few years ago. I forget the woman's name who wrote it, but it was out of Bath Spa, UK. I forget what university, but that might even be the name of the university. Anyway, but she kind of made the argument, very convincing argument, that you know how we have gemstones for each of the, you know, if you're born in January
Yes.
or whatever, that, or gemstones with each of the signs, a corresponding gemstone. So apparently that comes from the breastplate of the high priest in Hebrew sort of religion and magic, and I guess Kabbalistic stuff as well, because the Shem HaMephorash is, I think, largely a Kabbalistic idea, at least in terms of the 72 fold name. You know
Yeah.
what I'm talking about? The Shem
Yep.
HaMephorash?
100%. That makes sense. I actually interviewed, I forget the name of this guy, but he was a pretty great astrologer, and we talked a little bit about the Shem HaMephorash, and one of the things that he does do is he makes these amulets with with gemstones for his clients and stuff. So that actually aligns 100% with what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been encountering the Shem HaMephorash lately in some research I'm doing about the Shem angels and the Goetic demons, and squaring up the angels of the Shem HaMephorash with the demons of the Ars Goetia, and putting them on the ecliptic in what are called quinaries. Quinaries are 5-degree arc segments. So obviously 360 divided by 5 is 72. So you have 72 quinaries around the ecliptic, and each of those is ruled by a Shem angel and a Goetic demon. Like, for instance, the first one is Vaheyua is the angel, the Shem angel, for 0 degrees to 4 degrees 59 minutes Aries. So 0 degrees Aries to 4 degrees 59 minutes Aries is ruled by an angel and a demon. The angel is Vaheyua, and the demon is Baal, Bael, Baal.
Yeah.
So you can go around, all 72 of them have an angelic and demonic ruler.
Yeah. I don't know if I've asked you this.
That interests me a lot.
For sure. I'm not sure if I've asked you this before, but I wonder if you can give a little brief insight into the value of how the system of like Jyotish or sidereal astrology offers a different sort of informational structure than the like Hellenistic astrology, or how would you weigh them against each other and discuss their different significations, or yeah.
Sure. So a little history on that, because I've studied this subject, and so before about the 1st century CE, the Indian subcontinent had an Omenic astrology, a very primitive sort of proto-astrology, nothing like planets and signs and houses and how they're aspected. That's Hellenistic. But before about the 1st century BC or CE, they had nakshatras. Nakshatras are like this essentially lunar mansion scheme. I don't know a great deal about that, but they had a lunar mansion scheme, and they had basically a set of omens like you saw much earlier in Mesopotamia. But they didn't have proper astrology, because when we say astrology, we're talking about, academically, we're talking about something very particular. Astrology is planets in signs in houses and their aspect relationships on the ecliptic. So those are the 4 elements of proper astrology when we start calling it, proper astrology, as opposed to proto-astrology or Omenic astrology or astrotheology or stuff like that. But or astrolatry. Anyway, so in the Indian subcontinent, they had nakshatras and they had Omenic astrology, proto-astrology. But during the Hellenistic period, sometime around the 1st century BCE, probably in Alexandria, Egypt, the system came together. 2nd or 1st century BCE, the system came together and astrology became a thing. Almost overnight, though. It happened very rapidly. So there's an argument as to whether it was something that one group of people kind of devised and it just spread like wildfire, or if it was like had sort of a developmental period between several groups of people. I think probably several groups of people, because you see this. What makes astrology is that you have ideas from Mesopotamia coming in with ideas from dynastic Egypt and meeting on this central Hellenistic ground where you find things like Euclid and geometry and Greek optical theory and all this sort of stuff. So it took all of those components, Mesopotamian Omenic proto-astrology, Egyptian timekeeping. Like their decans were meant to keep time at night, so you could tell what time it is by looking at the certain asterisms, which are like small constellations. Anyway, so you get all those pieces, and they all converged in Alexandria in this early Hellenistic period, and they came together, and then you get proper astrology. So bringing this back to India, this is how this happened. And this is per people like David Pingree. I mean, real academic astrologers, people who devoted their life to this, and people who were in like the CCAG, like which was this group of scholars that were putting together critical editions of extant astrological texts and fragments. Anyway, so what happened was this: in Alexandria, they learned how to navigate the trade winds on the Red Sea, right there. And once they were able to navigate that, they brought documents down and up from the Indian subcontinent. And what happened was a document made it into India called the Yavana Jataka. And the Yavana Jataka is the source of Indian, like, Jyotish astrology. So when they have their planets in signs and houses and stuff like that, and their various Time Lord techniques, they come from this document called the Yavana Jataka. And the Yavana Jataka means sayings of the Greeks or nativities of the Greeks. So there was indisputably, and it's even in the title of this formational book, that they got Hellenistic astrology, blended that with their proto astrology that they had, their omens and their nakshatras, and then created sort of Vedic Jyotish, which is based on Hellenistic astrology. And that is not me being like ethno-chauvinist or, oh, this is better than that. It's not like any kind of a value judgment or anything. I'm just saying that it is demonstrable, and it is definitely 100% the case that the current or transmission of astrology went from Alexandria and then down through the Red Sea and then into the Indian subcontinent. So there are a lot of Time Lord techniques. Now, here's what was good. So astrology, after, let's say, the fall of the Roman Empire, astrology went into sort of disrepair for a while. It fell out of vogue. It wasn't maybe as practiced. But the Indian version of astrology, Jyotish, I guess, or Vedic, which was built upon the foundation of the Yavana Jataka kept going through that. So we lost stuff in the West during, let's say, the Middle Ages and late antiquity. Some things were lost that we reclaimed later through, thankfully, from the Vedic and Jyotish astrologers, but they were Hellenistic things that just came back, much like the transmission of alchemy and geometry and Greek philosophy that we had to get back from the Arabs in the West because it was just gone for a while. And we got astrology back from the Arabs. We got alchemy. I mean, there are so many words in alchemy that are obviously Arabic words, right? Just like there are so many words in the sciences like algebra or algorithm. These are Arabic words, right? Just like in like all the names of the stars, like Deneb, Al-Deneb, so many names of stars are Arabic words, or even something like astronomical ideas like the azimuth. The azimuth is a certain, imaginary circle around the Earth, and it's so we get a lot of these astronomical, geometrical, mathematical, chemical kind of words from that when the Arabs were the custodians of ancient knowledge, that we reclaimed in the West much later, like really during the Renaissance. You see that huge explosion with Pico della Mirandola, Marsilio Ficino translating Plato and the Hermetic corpus into English. So
Wow.
you see, and that's why we even had a Renaissance, is because that stuff came back from the fall of the Byzantine, fall of the Eastern Empire, all of these, and from the Arabs through Spain, right? Because Moorish Spain. So there were a couple of different ways through Spain and through the East that the West was re-imbued with this lost knowledge from antiquity.
Wow.
Which spurred on the Renaissance. There would be no Renaissance in the absence of that transmission.
Absolutely.
Pretty cool, huh? I think it's a fascinating story.
Yeah, I'd say. Well, I don't know if you're pressed.
I hope.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say I hope I'm doing a good job, like telling that story. Does that?
Yeah, you're blowing my mind. You're apt. I'm gonna have to listen to this a few more times because there's so much good stuff in it and all these questions that a lot of people have been curious about. So I think it's gonna be pretty epic for people to listen to. But I don't know if you're pressed on time right now or if you want to go over those diagrams at another time or how you're feeling, or just let me know. Either way works for me.
Yeah, why don't we do that as part 2? Because my wife, you probably saw her in the back.
That's what I was thinking.
My wife came home. Why don't we spend a whole episode in the future on Robert Flood's diagrams?
Absolutely.
Talk about the monochord and talk about his cosmology and stuff. That'd be cool.
Something to look forward to.
So call this, maybe you can call this one part 1. And
yes.
We'll do a part 2 at another time.
All right.
Sky, thanks so much. Thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you for being on. Do you want to throw out anything before you leave? Any links or anything? Or
sure, yeah. Go to my website, which is JaimePaulLamb.com. My name is spelled JaimePaulLamb. So JaimePaulLamb.com. JAIME. I've got music up there. I've got my blogs, my blog posts. I've got all my astrological and taroic stuff. I do a lot of tarot as well. And I'm a consulting astrologer with training. I do horary astrology. I do natal astrology primarily. And and I do tarot readings on Zoom. I'll do them over the phone or in person if you're in the area. But yeah, what else? Oh, and my books. There's a page for my books on there, so it's a one-stop shop of all stuff that I've got going on in terms of my work. So I'd appreciate any traffic that goes in that direction.
Beautiful. This was amazing. Thank you so much. Gratitude and appreciation, and can't wait for the next one. Talk next time.
Yeah. Thanks. Many thanks.